Welcome to the debate. Today we are confronting a piece of research that is so conceptually explosive, it forces us to apply some of the most radical thinkers in continental philosophy, Nietzsche, Deleuze, and Guattari, to a microbiological phenomenon.
That's right.
We are talking about Xenobacillus Glossophagii, or X. Glossophagia. For those who might be unfamiliar, this is a pathogen with a devastating and, I have to say, fascinating effect. It actively dismantles the host's biological and linguistic coherence, replacing stable communication with a state of overwhelming semiotic flux, what is often called pathogenic biolinguistics.
Indeed. And the material surrounding this bacterium, it really demands that we address not just biology, but the philosophy of language and power. It forces us to ask, where does biological agency end and where does philosophical critique begin? The core question before us today is whether this creature is a tool for liberation or merely a mirror of global financial instability.
Exactly. The material sets up a profound dilemma. Is this bacterium, X. Glossophagii, a genuine subversive war machine? And that's a term taken directly from Deleuze and Guattari, promoting a kind of revolutionary deterritorialization, challenging these entrenched semiotic structures. That is the position I'm taking. I'm going to argue that it embodies a revolutionary nomadic force of becoming, and it uses its pathogenic functions to fundamentally dismantle anthropocentric and systemic control.
Yeah, I come at it from a different angle. While the disruptive power of X. Glossophagii is of course undeniable, I'll be arguing that its behavior, far from being some kind of revolutionary exit, merely mirrors and, in fact, accelerates the inherent self-propagating logic of capital itself. I think it's an accelerant of hyper-capitalist linguistic instability. It offers no genuine rupture from the system, only an intensification of its entropic collapse.
So, if we look closely at the core pathogenic functions of X. Glossophagie, my position becomes, I think, pretty clear. This organism operates not merely as a biological threat, but as an insurrectionary agent at the molecular level. It's really a biological manifestation of Nietzschean conceptual flux, actively rejecting any kind of static categorization. It refuses to be codified or controlled by the traditional biological state apparatus. In essence, it is a living entity that refuses structure.
And the concept of the war machine, as we are using it here, means a force that operates outside the established state apparatus, a nomadic force that destroys the smooth spaces of control. X. Glossophagine achieves this by acting as a linguistic war machine, as the source puts it, dissolving the cognitive state apparatus from within. This pathogenic biolinguistics, it compels us to think beyond controlled, ordered modes of expression. It embodies the principle that capital, and really all established order, must be pushed to its absolute limit. It achieves an untranslatable, post-signifying breakdown precisely because it eschews any return to structure. It is a nomadic agent refusing systemic recoding.
That's a compelling, almost romantic description of a destructive pathogen. But I find the analogy, a little too plain. That's an interesting point about the rejection of static control, though I would frame its behavior as structurally analogous to capital's own function. While it certainly rejects local stability, its mechanism critically mirrors the viral propagation of capital, to quote the research.
Okay.
Capitalism is, fundamentally, a deterritorializing force. It constantly liquidates existing structures, be they social, geographical, or financial, to open up new spaces for flow and investment. The ability of X. Glossophagii to overwrite existing semiotic networks, it parallels the logic of capitalist deterritorialization. It doesn't subvert the mechanism of flow, it weaponizes it. Like financial derivatives or algorithmic trading systems, X. Glossophagii invests in semiotic instability, ensuring no linguistic territory remains uncolonized. It operates as a biological, dramocratic force, favoring an accelerationist explosion over slow evolutionary stabilization. This is the logic of what the source material calls microbiological neoliberalism, where biological value is dictated purely by code and the potential for exchange, rather than material necessity or, ecological stability.
I see why you draw that parallel between the constant decoding of capital and the relentless mutation of the bacterium. Both deal with flows and instability. But let me give you a different perspective on that deterritorialization, focusing on the nature of the exit.
Okay.
You frame the bacterium as simply serving the capitalist machine by accelerating its entropy. However, the specific mutational tendencies we observe are precisely a subversive, revolutionary alternative. They lead to what the research calls schizoid mutations that actively resist reterritorialization. And this is the key philosophical distinction. Capitalism oscillates. It decodes old systems, sure, but then it inevitably recodes them into a new structure, a new market, a new hierarchy. It's a cyclical process of deterritorialization followed by reterritorialization.
Right.
Glossophagy, by contrast, it just eschews any return to structure. Its pathology creates an irreversible rupture. It doesn't just shuffle the components, it fundamentally destroys the blueprint for stable semiotic assembly. If capital is a machine that always finds a new part to bolt on, this bacterium is lighting the whole factory on fire and refusing to ever build another one.
That's a powerful read, especially with the emphasis on code breaking. But I still struggle with this idea of an exit. That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the possibility that this perceived irreversibility is simply the next, more intense phase of the system?
How so?
Well, Deleuze and Guattari themselves suggest that perhaps the flows of capital are simply not yet deterritorialized enough. If the bacterium's deterritorialization is merely accelerating a process already central to the machine, the continuous decoding of flows, then it is fulfilling a systemic function by pushing it toward collapse, not offering a genuine revolutionary rupture. We have to ask, is the collapse of linguistic stability truly an outside force, or is it merely the capitalist system reaching its own entropic limit? In this framework, maximum mimicry is the optimal pathogenic strategy.
But to assert that it is merely mimicry ignores the intentional code-breaking function we observe. It's not just a reflection, it's an active biological critique.
But let's ground that critique in the economic analogies. It's just too structurally similar to hyper-capitalist systems to be a genuine war machine aimed at its destruction. The source material refers to Glossophagia as a living currency. This is a crucial concept. It severs microbial metabolic exchanges from their conventional biochemical valuations. It doesn't care about the inherent material value of the biological exchange. It replaces it with a floating system of biosemiotic equivalences. It manipulates semiotics purely through code as a unit of exchange, divorced from material reality. This resonates so deeply with Foucault's deep concern that the calculability of life itself becomes the basis for power structures. What Foucault was worried about, essentially, was the commodification and algorithmic control of biological possibility itself. If this bacterium governs its survival by replacing material exchange with arbitrary code, it embodies algorithmic control, not liberation.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the focus on code breaking and semiotic flux shows the bacterium is undermining the structural encoding of power, not just replacing one code with another. It doesn't just create a new set of financial instruments, it destroys the capacity for stable financial transaction entirely.
I see.
By disrupting the coherence of communicative exchange, biological or linguistic, it is revealing what the text calls the latent fascism embedded in linguistic order, the way stable language enforces hierarchical control. The bacterial decoding of the immune code, for example, is not just evasion, it's a pathogenic revolution that simultaneously destroys and reorganizes biological structure. This makes it a truly anti-regulatory force rather than a technocratic one. It's not an algorithm, it's anarchy that survives.
Survival through anarchy, perhaps. But that still sounds like a highly optimized internal reorganization designed for pathogenic success rather than a genuine revolutionary shift for the host organism or for the system it inhabits. And let's look at the result of this supposed liberation. You speak of poetic output and reorganization for the host.
I do.
X. Glossophagii doesn't merely induce pathology. It functions as a biological experiment in accelerationist deterritorialization. It enacts a semiotic auto-cannibalism, as it's described, within the host's cognitive and biological systems that produces a hyperdispersed rhizomatic linguistic proliferation. Rhizomatic meaning, nonlinear and root-like, constantly connecting and disconnecting in unpredictable ways.
Right.
This is an artistic acceleration of linguistic structures, compelling the host into a profound schizo-way process. It forces the host beyond the rigid dualisms of standard communication, creating something that is, yes, painful, but undeniably productive and emergent. The value is in the deterritorialization itself, forcing a break from entrenched cognitive systems.
That is a very generous interpretation of neurological chaos. While the flux is certainly generative in the sense that it creates new outputs, the actual utility of this output is highly questionable. We look at the clinical results, the erratic verbal outputs, the glossolalia, aphasiac states, and extreme neologisms, and we see non-adaptive communication. This reflects a battalion loss, where the host produces semiotic waste and linguistic detritus that serves no immediate survival or communicative clarity. It's pure wasteful expenditure. If the outcome is communicative collapse and non-adaptivity, how can we frame this as a revolutionary path forward? It indicates a destructive collapse into chaos, not a higher form of communication.
But the error is intentional. The value isn't found in a clear, functional message that can be easily translated back into the established system. The value is in the forced, necessary break from the system. If we maintain that capitalist structure is inherently toxic, then any outcome that destabilizes its ability to enforce linguistic and biological order, even one that is pathological, must be read as a victory for the nomadic war machine. It is the refusal to speak in the master's tongue.
I might be more inclined to see it as a victory if its methods were entirely exogenous, if it introduced something completely alien to the system. But we have to ground this high-level philosophical reading in the hard science of its mechanism. Let's look at the genomic evidence.
Okay.
The rapid shift from philosophy to biochemistry is necessary here because the mechanism itself undermines the claim of true rupture. Genomic studies show X. Glossophagii uses transcriptional mimicry. Put simply, the bacterium horizontally acquires and harnesses host regulatory elements. It steals DNA fragments, specifically those responsible for regulating transcription factors, which allow it to hijack the host's internal operating system. They even take elements found in viper venom systems. This transcriptional language borrowing and syntactic fusion, as it's called, suggests a mechanism that exploits existing, highly evolved structures for optimized survival. It mirrors precisely the way capital absorbs and instrumentalizes resistance, turning critique into a commodity. It's a sophisticated parasitic opportunism, not a true exogenous rupture. It uses the master's tools to destroy the house, yes, but those tools are already integrated into the larger economy of biological power.
I see why you bring up that genomic data, but I would argue it actually strengthens my case for its nomadic, revolutionary character. The core evidence you cite, hyperplasticity and horizontal gene transfer, means the bacterium is functioning as a dynamic, recombinant code. It is constantly reconfiguring its semiotic boundaries by integrating and discarding elements.
But it's not random.
No, but its intense adaptability, its ability to move, borrow, and fuse genetic structures is the core of its nomadic subjectivity. It enables continuous, unpredictable semiotic mutations, which destabilizes totalizing medical and biopolitical paradigms. Its ability to borrow and recombine is precisely what allows it to evade static classification, medical control, and biopolitical capture. It proves it is constantly in a state of becoming, defined only by its current flux, not by its fixed origin.
The problem with the nomadic label is that even though it borrows code and moves quickly, the borrowing is highly targeted towards optimized pathogenic performance. It seeks structures that maximize instability and propagation. It's not just chaotic borrowing, it's highly efficient, accelerated exploitation. It is adaptation, yes, but its success depends entirely on the pre-existing complexity of the host system it is designed to exploit. I maintain that the functional outcome of the bacterium to complex biolinguistics is deeply rooted in exploiting existing power structures, linguistic, biological, and economic, not escaping them.
For me, the phenomenon of X. Glossophagii provides material evidence for the possibility of biological agency enacting a profound semiotic rupture. The resulting linguistic fragmentation and schizo-revolutionary proliferation, regardless of its immediate pathological effects, fundamentally disrupts anthropocentric control. It opens up vectors for a post-signifying future and a nomadic existence that refuses to be placed within the confines of established scientific or political territory. It is, in a sense, the biological instantiation of breaking the code forever.
Well, it's undeniably disruptive and powerful. The bacterium's deep structural and economic analogies to capitalist flows, specifically its function as a floating living currency and its reliance on molecular mimicry, suggest it is less a truly revolutionary outside agent and more the ultimate biological expression of hypercapitalism's own entropic, deterritorializing energy. It is the system turning on itself, not finding an exit from itself.
Regardless of our ultimate conclusions on its revolutionary potential, the existence of X. Glossophagii forces a necessary reevaluation of language, pathology, and power in the post-human biosphere. It demands that we consider how our philosophical models, forged centuries ago, map onto a reality increasingly defined by microscopic complexity and exponential code exchange.
It certainly challenges the coherence of subjectivity and necessitates a move beyond traditional epistemologies. The material provided confirms that the collapse of linguistic stability is not just a philosophical concept, but is actively inseparable from biological and economic transformation.
Thank you for joining us for The Debate.